Picture, if you will, a moment that would reshape the course of human history. The year is 57 after Christ. In a modest house overlooking the bustling port of Corinth, a remarkable transformation is taking place. Not the kind you might witness in nature, no butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, no seed breaking through winter soil, but something far more extraordinary. Here, a man is creating something that will outlive empires. His name is Saul of Tarsus, though the world will know him as Paul. 25 years have passed since lightning quite literally struck his life on the Damascus road. One moment, he was Christianity's most feared persecutor, hunting believers with the methodical precision of a predator tracking prey. The next, he lay blinded in the dust, transformed by an encounter so profound that it rewrote the very architecture of his soul. Consider what those 25 years have wrought. 3 missionary journeys stretch behind him like the migration routes of ancient birds, purposeful, demanding, fraught with peril. His body bears the map of his adventures, scars from countless beatings, marks from stones hurled by angry crowds, the weathered hands of a tent-maker who has sewn canvas under Mediterranean stars and crafted theology in prison cells. Now, as autumn light filters through the window of this Corinthian house, Paul sets his sights on the greatest prize of all, Rome itself, the eternal city, the beating heart of an empire that stretches from the mist-shrouded hills of Britain to the burning sands of the Sahara Desert. An empire of 60 million souls, bound together by roads that slice through mountains and span rivers, united by laws written in bronze and enforced by legions. But Paul sees something others cannot. He understands that conquering Rome means conquering the world not through force of arms, but through the revolutionary power of an idea. And ideas, as any naturalist knows, are the most persistent travellers of all. They cross oceans without ships, scale mountains without paths, and survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. Imagine the scene more closely. Paul paces the room, his voice carrying the urgency of his mission. Beside him sits Tertius, his faithful secretary, stylus poised over papyrus. Every word Paul speaks will be weighed, measured, crafted with the precision of a master architect, laying the foundation stones of a cathedral. This is not mere correspondence. This is intellectual architecture designed to stand for millennia. The Christian community in Rome numbers perhaps 2,000 souls, a small flock scattered across the 7 hills like seeds on varied soil. They meet in secret, in houses tucked away in the city's labyrinthine neighborhoods. The wealthy gather in spacious villas on the Palatine Hill. Slaves and freedmen crowd into cramped apartments in the Subura district. Jews and Gentiles, Romans and foreigners, masters and servants, all united by their faith in a crucified carpenter from an obscure province. But clouds gather on the horizon. Emperor Nero's paranoia grows like a cancer through the imperial palace. Anti-Jewish sentiment spreads through the capital like wildfire through dry grass. These believers face mounting pressure, and they know, as all creatures know, when storms approach, that survival demands adaptation. Here lies the remarkable paradox that Paul grasps with startling clarity. He has never set foot in Rome, yet he prepares to conquer it. Like a navigator charting courses to lands beyond the horizon, he understands that some journeys begin not with physical steps, but with the migration of ideas. And the idea he carries burns within him like a star seeking its constellation. Working alongside Tertius, Paul weaves together the revolutionary discoveries of his extraordinary life. Every sentence carries the weight of his dramatic transformation. Every argument bears the urgency of his mission. This letter represents the culmination of decades spent crossing the boundaries that have divided humanity since civilization began. The walls between Jew and Gentile, slave and free, barbarian and Greek. Watch him as he dictates. His words flow with the same inexorable force that drives rivers toward the sea. He speaks of universal guilt and cosmic redemption, of divine justice and overwhelming grace, of transformation so complete that it makes new creatures from old. The papyrus fills with concepts that will, in time, topple philosophical systems and reshape entire civilizations. But consider the fragility of this moment. This letter, this world-changing document, will travel 600 miles by Roman roads. It will be carried by a woman named Phoebe, a deaconess from the port city of Centurai. Picture her courage, a woman in the 1st century, bearing precious cargo across bandit-infested roads, through territories where Christians face increasing hostility. Neither Paul nor Phoebe realizes what they transport. In her travel pouch lies intellectual dynamite that will explode through history with more force than any military campaign. The words carefully inscribed on those papyrus sheets will ignite the Reformation, inspire the civil rights movement, and comfort martyrs facing death in arena sand and concentration camps alike. Think of it this way. In nature, the smallest seeds often produce the mightiest trees. An acorn, weighing mere grams, contains within its shell the genetic blueprint for an oak that may stand for centuries, shelter countless creatures, and shape entire ecosystems. Paul's letter represents something similar, a seed of truth that will germinate in soil he will never see, taking root in cultures not yet born, bearing fruit in seasons he cannot imagine. The Roman roads stretch before Phoebe like arteries carrying life throughout the empire. These engineering marvels connect distant provinces with mathematical precision. Stone by carefully laid stone, they represent Rome's genius for imposing order upon chaos, for binding diverse peoples into a single functioning whole. But Paul understands something remarkable. These same roads that carry Roman legions and imperial decrees will now carry something far more revolutionary, the gospel of grace. As evening falls over Corinth and Mediterranean stars emerge like ancient lighthouses, Paul completes his masterwork. 16 chapters, 431 verses, 25,000 words in the original Greek. Every syllable has been tested on the anvil of experience, forged in the furnace of persecution, refined through years of cross-cultural ministry among peoples who shared nothing except their common need for hope. Tomorrow, Phoebe will begin her journey. The letter will leave this humble house and venture into an empire that has conquered the known world through military might. But empires built on force alone inevitably crumble. The truth Paul sends forth operates by different laws, laws that transform from within rather than conquer from without, that liberate rather than subjugate, that offer life rather than demand death. In the grand tapestry of human history, this moment in a Corinthian house represents something unprecedented. Never before has anyone attempted to systematically explain the relationship between God and humanity with such comprehensive clarity. Never has anyone dared to demolish the religious barriers that have divided the human family since the dawn of civilization. Never has anyone offered hope so universal yet so personal, so simple yet so profound. As Paul seals the letter and entrusts it to Phoebe's care, he cannot know that scholars 2 millennia hence will still parse every phrase, seeking to unlock secrets that reshape lives and topple kingdoms. He cannot foresee that his words will echo in cathedral choirs and cotton fields, in monastery cells and university lecture halls, in the final testimonies of those who choose death rather than deny the truths he now commits to papyrus. What he does know, what burns within him with the certainty of the Damascus Road, is that this letter carries more than theology. It carries transformation, not the gradual change observable in geological time, but the instantaneous metamorphosis that occurs when divine truth encounters human need. The journey begins. Tomorrow, one woman will carry these words toward Rome. But the ultimate destination lies far beyond the 7 hills, beyond the borders of empire, beyond the boundaries of time itself. This letter will travel paths not yet carved, reach peoples not yet born, and offer hope to hearts not yet broken. In the gathering darkness of that Corinthian evening, Paul has done something remarkable. He has captured lightning in papyrus, the same transforming force that struck him down and raised him up, now prepared to strike again in Roman hearts, and in every heart that dares. To encounter the revolutionary truth he sends forth into an unsuspecting world. The most influential letter in human history is complete. Its journey is about to begin. In the natural world, the most enduring structures follow precise mathematical principles. The spiral of a nautilus shell echoes the golden ratio. The hexagonal cells of a honeycomb achieve maximum storage with minimum material. Crystal formations repeat their patterns with atomic precision. And now, in a letter travelling the dusty roads toward Rome, we encounter architecture of an entirely different kind. Intellectual architecture designed not just to endure, but to transform. Paul has constructed his masterpiece with the same meticulous precision that governs the formation of snowflakes or the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower head. 16 chapters unfold before us like the chambers of a perfectly engineered shell. 431 verses connect with the inexorable logic of a river system flowing toward the sea. 25,000 words in the original Greek, each one positioned with the deliberate care of a master craftsman, placing stones in a foundation that must bear the weight of eternity. Consider the remarkable symmetry of what Paul has created. Like a great cathedral that rises from its foundations through nave and transept to soaring spire, this letter ascends through carefully planned stages. Every sentence builds upon the previous one, creating an unstoppable logical progression that sweeps away centuries of religious confusion, like a spring flood clearing debris from a riverbed. Watch how the foundation takes shape. Romans 1 through 3 present us with perhaps the most comprehensive diagnosis of the human condition ever attempted. Like a physician conducting a thorough examination, Paul systematically exposes the symptoms of a universal malady. Jew and Gentile alike, the religiously privileged and the morally enlightened, the civilized and the barbarous, all stand revealed as patients suffering from the same terminal condition. Imagine witnessing this courtroom drama unfold. Universal human guilt becomes not merely a theological concept, but a stark reality demonstrated with the precision of a mathematical proof. Human morality, religious ritual, ethnic privilege, all the defenses humanity has constructed against the divine examination crumble like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Paul presents his evidence with the methodical thoroughness of a naturalist cataloguing species. The Gentile world, with all its philosophical sophistication, stands condemned by its own moral failures. Despite possessing the light of conscience and the testimony of creation itself, they have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Their very worship has become corrupted, leading to the corruption of everything else. But observe the brilliant strategy at work. Here, Paul does not allow his Jewish readers the comfort of superiority. With surgical precision, he demonstrates that possessing the law provides no immunity from the disease of sin. Indeed, the very law that was meant to be a lamp to their feet becomes a mirror reflecting their failures. The teacher of others cannot teach himself. The preacher against stealing steals. The one who abhors idols commits sacrilege. Consider the devastating conclusion that emerges like sunrise after a long night. There is none righteous. No, not one. This is not philosophical speculation, but observed reality. Like a biologist documenting the universal presence of entropy in living systems, Paul demonstrates that moral failure permeates every level of human existence. The throat is an open grave, the tongue practices deceit, the mouth is full of cursing and bitterness, destruction and misery mark their paths. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Like the dramatic transformation that occurs when a caterpillar dissolves within its chrysalis, only to emerge as something entirely new, Paul's argument undergoes a stunning metamorphosis. The cosmic courtroom, where every human defendant stood guilty as charged, suddenly transforms into a celebration hall. Romans 4 through 8 present us with the revolution that reshapes reality itself. Here we encounter justification by faith alone, not as abstract theology, but as a force of nature as fundamental as gravity or electromagnetism. This principle operates with the same universal consistency, whether applied to Abraham in ancient Mesopotamia or to contemporary believers in cosmopolitan Rome. Watch Paul's genius at work as he examines Abraham, the father of faith. 430 years stretch between Abraham's justification and Moses receiving the law on Mount Sinai. This temporal sequence becomes crucial evidence in Paul's case. Like a geologist reading the story written in rock strata, Paul demonstrates that righteousness by faith preceded the law by nearly half a millennium. Abraham was declared righteous before the law even existed, proving that law-keeping cannot be the basis for divine acceptance. The implications cascade through human understanding like water finding its level. Every religion on earth operates on the fundamental assumption that people must earn divine favor through performance. But Paul's observation of Abraham's experience demolishes this assumption as thoroughly as the discovery of heliocentrism demolished geocentric astronomy. Consider the divine transaction that Paul describes with such precision. Christ's perfect life credits to the believer's account, while the believer's sin transfers to Christ's account. This exchange occurs instantaneously upon faith, transforming the believer's legal standing before God from guilty to innocent, from condemned to justified. Like the moment when potential energy converts to kinetic energy, releasing forces that reshape landscapes, justification releases transformative power that reshapes human existence. But Paul does not stop with legal standing. Romans 5 through 8 trace the process of transformation that follows justification. Like spring follows winter, the Holy Spirit enters the human heart, beginning a metamorphosis as complete as any we observe in nature. Old patterns of thought and behavior give way to new ones. The law of sin and death yields to the law of the Spirit of life. Here we encounter one of the most remarkable descriptions of internal conflict ever recorded. Paul documents the war that rages within the human heart with the honesty of a field researcher reporting uncomfortable truths. The good that I want I do not do, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. This is not theological theory, but lived experience, as observable and universal as the struggle between predator and prey in any ecosystem. Yet this conflict serves a purpose, like the beneficial stress that strengthens bones and muscles. Spiritual struggle drives believers toward dependence on divine grace rather than human effort. The very weakness that frustrates becomes the strength that overcomes, as God's power finds its perfect expression in human limitation. Romans 9 through 11 address the explosive question that threatens to shatter early Christianity. What happens to God's chosen people, the Jews? Paul navigates this theological minefield with the skill of a master diplomat threading his way through hostile territory. Like a naturalist explaining how apparent extinction can actually represent adaptation and eventual resurgence, Paul reveals God's mysterious plan that encompasses both temporary rejection and ultimate restoration. Consider the profound mystery Paul unveils here. Israel's hardening serves a cosmic purpose, creating space for Gentile inclusion. But this hardening is neither complete nor permanent. Like a tree that appears dead in winter, but contains the secret of spring renewal within its seemingly lifeless branches, Israel retains the divine promise that will ultimately flower into restoration. Finally, Romans 12 through 16 provide the practical blueprint for transformed living. Here Paul demonstrates how revolutionary theology produces revolutionary lifestyle. Like an engineer showing how theoretical principles translate into functional design, he reveals how internal spiritual change produces external behavioral transformation in families, communities, and governments. The letter's architecture achieves something unprecedented in human literature. It diagnoses the universal human problem with clinical precision, presents the divine solution with mathematical clarity, and provides practical application with engineering thoroughness. Every element supports every other element, creating a structure as stable as granite, yet as dynamic as a living organism. As Phoebe carries this architectural marvel along Roman roads, she transports more than papyrus and ink. She carries a blueprint for human transformation that will prove as enduring as the pyramids and as revolutionary as the discovery of fire. The magnificent design Paul has created will reshape not just individual lives, but entire civilizations. In nature, the most successful designs achieve maximum impact with elegant simplicity. Paul's letter embodies this principle perfectly. Its structure appears deceptively straightforward, yet contains layers of meaning that continue revealing themselves to successive generations of readers. Like the DNA molecule that appears simple but contains the information necessary to construct entire organisms, Romans contains within its elegant architecture the power to reconstruct human hearts, communities, and cultures. The revolution has been designed. Now it awaits implementation in the hearts and minds of those who will encounter its transformative power. There are moments in the natural world when everything changes. The instant when a massive star collapses into a supernova, releasing more energy in seconds than our sun will produce in billions of years. The moment when tectonic plates shift, redirecting rivers and reshaping continents. The precise instant when a genetic mutation creates a new species, opening pathways of evolution that will flourish for millennia. In Paul's letter to Rome, we encounter such a moment not geological or astronomical, but something far more profound. In a single revolutionary sentence, Paul declares that God makes the ungodly righteous through faith alone, apart from works of law. This statement detonates like intellectual lightning across the ancient world, obliterating the fundamental assumption underlying every religion in human history, that people must earn divine favor through performance. Consider the magnitude of what Paul has discovered. For thousands of years, human beings have approached the divine through elaborate systems of earning and deserving. Temples rise like mountains across the ancient world, each one representing humanity's attempt to bridge the gap between earth and heaven through sacrifice, ritual, and moral achievement. The Greeks pursue virtue through philosophy. The Romans seek favor through civic duty. The Jews strive for righteousness through law observance. Every culture, every religion, every philosophical system operates on the same basic principle. Divine acceptance must be earned. Paul shatters this assumption with the force of an earthquake. Watch how his breakthrough emerges through careful observation of Abraham, the father of faith. Like a naturalist studying the fossil record to understand evolutionary history, Paul examines the chronological sequence of events in Abraham's life. 430 years stretch between Abraham's justification and Moses receiving the law on Mount Sinai. This temporal gap becomes the key that unlocks everything. Picture Abraham in the ancient city of Ur, surrounded by ziggurats dedicated to moon gods and fertility deities. He possesses no temple, no priesthood, no elaborate ritual system. He has no law to obey, no commandments to keep, no religious performance to maintain. Yet when God makes his extraordinary promise that Abraham will become the father of many nations, Abraham simply believes. And in that moment of pure trust, God counts his faith as righteousness. The implications cascade through human understanding like an avalanche. If Abraham was declared righteous before the law existed, then law-keeping cannot be the basis for divine acceptance. If justification occurred through faith alone, then human performance adds nothing to the equation. If God credited righteousness to Abraham as a gift rather than wages, then divine acceptance operates by entirely different principles than human imagination has conceived. Consider what this means for every human soul. The crushing weight of earning divine approval through religious performance simply vanishes. Like a prisoner discovering that the cell door was never locked, humanity learns that the barrier to divine acceptance exists not in God's unwillingness to forgive, but in our unwillingness to receive forgiveness as a gift. Paul's discovery solves the greatest puzzle in human existence. How can a perfect God accept imperfect people without compromising his standards? The answer flows through substitution as elegant as any solution in mathematics or physics. Christ's perfect life credits to the believer's account, while the believer's sin transfers to Christ's account. This divine transaction occurs instantaneously upon faith, transforming the believer's legal standing before God from guilty to innocent, from condemned to justified. Imagine witnessing this cosmic exchange. Like matter and antimatter meeting and releasing pure energy, human guilt encounters divine grace and produces transformation so complete that Scripture declares the believer becomes a new creation. Old things pass away, all things become new. The caterpillar dissolves so completely within its chrysalis that only genetic markers remain to prove its former identity. But observe how Paul's breakthrough extends beyond individual transformation. The same faith that justified Abraham operates across every boundary that divides humanity. Jew and Gentile, slave and free, barbarian and Scythian all discover that divine grace recognizes no ethnic preferences, no cultural superiority, no social hierarchies. The ground proves level at the foot of the cross. This revelation strikes at the very heart of first-century social structure. Roman society operates on rigid class distinctions. Jewish culture maintains careful separation between the circumcised and uncircumcised. Greek philosophy divides humanity between the enlightened and the barbarous. But Paul's discovery demolishes these walls as thoroughly as Joshua's trumpets brought down the walls of Jericho. Consider the psychological liberation this breakthrough produces. For centuries, human beings have staggered under the crushing weight of trying to earn divine approval through religious performance. The Hindu pursues moksha through endless cycles of reincarnation. The Buddhist seeks nirvana through the elimination of desire. The Stoic attempts virtue through rational self-control. Every system demands that humans achieve what their very nature makes impossible. Paul's discovery announces that the race is already won, the price already paid, the performance already completed. Acceptance precedes achievement. Love motivates obedience. Grace empowers transformation. Like discovering that gravity makes flight possible rather than impossible when properly understood, humans learn that divine acceptance becomes the launching pad for genuine moral transformation rather than its impossible prerequisite. The revolution extends into every corner of human experience. Art begins, reflecting themes of redemption rather than merely depicting religious obligation. Literature explores grace rather than simply cataloguing moral failure. Music expresses joy rather than only lamenting human inadequacy. Social reform emerges from gratitude rather than guilt. But perhaps most remarkably, Paul's breakthrough creates the possibility of genuine community across every barrier that has historically divided humanity. When divine acceptance comes through faith rather than ethnic identity, cultural achievement, or social position, then believers discover they share something more fundamental than anything that separates them. Picture the implications unfolding like ripples across a still pond. The Jewish believer can fellowship with the Gentile believer because both stand justified by the same faith. The wealthy Roman matron can worship alongside the Greek slave because both received righteousness as the same gift. The educated philosopher can learn from the uneducated fisherman because both possess the same spirit. This was revolutionary beyond anything the ancient world had imagined. Social structures that had seemed as permanent as mountain ranges begin shifting like sand dunes in wind. The early church becomes a social experiment unlike anything in human history. Communities where the normal rules of class, ethnicity, and gender create voluntary rather than mandatory boundaries. Yet Paul's breakthrough does not eliminate moral standards. Rather, it transforms their purpose. Law no longer functions as a ladder to climb toward divine acceptance, but as a mirror reflecting the character of the God who has already accepted us. Obedience flows from gratitude rather than obligation, from love rather than fear, from transformation rather than performance. Consider how this changes everything. The believer no longer obeys commandments to become righteous, but because he has already been declared righteous. She no longer pursues holiness to earn God's love, but because she has already been loved unconditionally. They no longer strive for perfection to avoid condemnation, but because condemnation has already been removed forever. Like a plant that grows towards sunlight, not to earn the sun's approval, but because it has already received the sun's life-giving energy, the justified believer grows in righteousness, not to achieve divine acceptance, but because divine acceptance has already been achieved through Christ's perfect work. Paul's great breakthrough will echo through history with increasing volume. Augustine will weep in his garden as these truths pierce his heart. Luther will find peace in his tower as this revelation liberates his conscience. Wesley will feel his heart strangely warmed as this discovery transforms his ministry. Countless millions will discover that the God they thought they had to appease has been waiting all along to embrace them as beloved children. The revolution is complete. Grace has defeated law forever. The age of earning has ended. The age of receiving has begun. In the depths of winter, when snow blankets the earth and life appears dormant, remarkable processes unfold beneath the frozen surface. Root systems continue growing. Seeds prepare for spring germination. Nutrients flow through seemingly lifeless trees. What appears static pulses with invisible transformation. The dormant season conceals the most profound preparations for explosive growth. Paul understands this principle as he transitions from theological theory to practical transformation. Revolutionary ideas, like seeds in winter soil, must germinate into revolutionary living. Grace received must become grace expressed. Divine acceptance must transform into human action. The internal revolution of justification must produce the external revolution of transformation. Consider how Paul approaches this transition. Like a master engineer demonstrating how theoretical principles translate into functional design, he reveals how the invisible work of grace produces visible changes in human behavior. The same divine power that declared the believer righteous now begins the lifelong process of making the believer righteous in daily experience. The transformation begins with sacrifice, but sacrifice unlike anything the ancient world has known. No longer do believers offer external animals on temple altars. Instead, they offer themselves as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This voluntary surrender of the entire person replaces the external rituals of temple worship with the internal reality of heart worship. Picture what this means in practical terms. The Roman businessman conducting trade in the Forum discovers that every transaction becomes an act of spiritual service. The mother preparing meals for her family realizes that domestic duties transform into divine worship. The soldier standing guard on Hadrian's Wall understands that military service expresses spiritual devotion. Every ordinary activity becomes extraordinary when performed as an offering to the God who has already accepted the offerer. This represents a revolution as dramatic as any political upheaval. For centuries, religious activity has been compartmentalized into sacred spaces and special times. Temples house the gods. Priests mediate divine encounters. Festivals mark religious observance. But Paul declares that justified believers become living temples, priests of their own devotion, participants in continuous worship, that transforms every moment into sacred time. Watch how this principle extends into community life. Spiritual gifts emerge as grace flows through transformed believers into their communities. Unlike human talents distributed by genetics or education, spiritual gifts represent divine abilities supernaturally imparted for community benefit. Prophecy brings divine perspective to human situations. Teaching illuminates divine truth for human understanding. Service channels divine love through human actions. Consider the remarkable diversity Paul describes: prophecy, ministry, teaching, exhortation, giving, leadership, mercy. Each gift as distinct as the varieties of flowers in a meadow, yet all drawing life from the same divine source. Like the specialized organs of a healthy body, each believer contributes unique functions while participating in the same unified life. This creates communities unlike anything the ancient world has witnessed. Greek societies organize around philosophical schools. Roman institutions structure themselves through military hierarchy. Jewish communities center on genealogical connections. But Christian communities discover unity in diversity, strength in interdependence, and purpose in mutual service. Imagine visiting such a community in first-century Rome. The wealthy senator's wife exercises the gift of mercy, caring for homeless widows. The Greek philosopher uses his gift of teaching to instruct former slaves in divine truth. The freedman displays the gift of prophecy, bringing divine messages to educated patricians. Social barriers that have seemed as permanent as the foundations of the Colosseum prove as permeable as morning mist before sunlight. But Paul's practical wisdom extends beyond community dynamics into the complex realm of government relations. Writing during Nero's increasingly tyrannical reign, when Christians face growing suspicion and mounting persecution, he nevertheless instructs believers to honor governmental authority as God's ordained instrument for maintaining social order. Consider the delicate balance Paul strikes here. Like a navigator charting safe passage between dangerous reefs, he guides believers through the treacherous waters of civic responsibility under unjust rule. Submit to governing authorities, he counsels, for they serve God's purposes even when they oppose God's people. Pay taxes to Caesar while remembering that ultimate allegiance belongs to God alone. This instruction will prove prophetic as Christian history unfolds through centuries of persecution, revolution, and democratic development. From the Roman catacombs to the Soviet gulags, from the American Revolution to the Civil Rights Movement, believers will wrestle with the tension between submission and conscience, between respect for authority and resistance to injustice. Paul provides no simple formula for resolving these tensions. Instead, he offers principles as durable as granite, yet as flexible as flowing water. Honor governing authorities as divine instruments, while remembering that God alone deserves absolute obedience. Respect human laws while maintaining ultimate loyalty to divine law. Submit to governmental power while preparing to suffer for governmental resistance when conscience demands. Community harmony receives Paul's detailed attention as he addresses the explosive tensions between Jewish and Gentile believers. These differences threaten to fracture the early church along ethnic lines, as sharp as any political boundary. Dietary laws divide dinner tables. Sabbath observance creates scheduling conflicts. Festival celebrations highlight cultural differences that seem irreconcilable. Watch Paul's diplomatic genius at work. Rather than mandating uniform practice, he focuses on mutual acceptance based on conscience rather than conformity. The believer who observes dietary restrictions should not judge the believer who eats freely. The believer who treats all days alike should not despise the believer who honors special days. Each must act according to conviction while accepting those who reach different conclusions. This principle will echo through church history as believers navigate countless cultural conflicts. From debates about music styles to controversies over worship forms, from arguments about social customs to disagreements about political engagement, Paul's framework provides guidance as relevant today as it was in first century Rome. Consider the profound wisdom embedded in this approach. Unity does not require uniformity. Fellowship does not demand conformity. Love expresses itself through acceptance rather than agreement. The bonds that unite believers in Christ prove stronger than the preferences that might divide them in practice. But Paul does not stop with community relationships. He extends his practical wisdom into the most intimate aspects of human experience: marriage, family, work, and personal relationships. Here too, grace transforms everything it touches. Husbands love wives as Christ loved the church. Wives respect husbands as the church honors Christ. Parents nurture children without exasperating them. Children obey parents as service to the Lord. Even slavery, that fundamental institution of ancient society, comes under the transforming influence of grace. Masters treat slaves with justice and fairness, remembering they too have a master in heaven. Slaves serve earthly masters as unto the Lord, finding dignity in service and purpose in submission. The revolutionary principle that believers share equal standing before God begins eroding the foundations of social hierarchy from within. Like water finding its way through limestone, grace seeps into every crevice of human experience, transforming relationships that seemed fixed by nature and culture. The gospel proves more revolutionary than any political manifesto, more transformative than any social program, more powerful than any military campaign. As Paul's practical instructions unfold like a blueprint for transformed civilization, we witness the organic connection between divine acceptance and human transformation. Grace received becomes grace expressed. Love experienced becomes love extended. Acceptance enjoyed becomes acceptance offered. The revolution that began in individual hearts spreads into communities, societies, and cultures. The seeds of transformation have been planted. Now they begin to sprout, preparing for harvest seasons that will reshape the world. Like the songs of migrating birds that carry across vast distances, guiding travelers and marking seasons, Paul's letter to Rome begins its journey through human history. Each generation will hear its call, respond to its message, and carry its truths forward into uncharted territories of human experience. The intellectual dynamite Phoebe carried from Corinth will detonate repeatedly through the centuries, each explosion reshaping the landscape of human understanding. Consider the First Great Awakening. In the year 396, in a garden in Milan, a brilliant young professor named Augustine sits weeping beneath a fig tree. His name will echo through history as one of the greatest minds ever produced by human civilization. But on this day he is simply a tormented soul wrestling with moral failure and spiritual emptiness. Augustine has scaled the heights of Roman intellectual life. His rhetorical skills have earned him prestigious teaching positions. His philosophical insights have attracted admiring students. His literary abilities have produced works of enduring beauty. Yet success tastes like ashes in his mouth. The more he achieves, the more empty he feels. The higher he climbs, the deeper he falls into despair. Picture the scene as it unfolds like a scene from the natural world, where sudden transformation occurs in response to environmental pressure. Augustine's internal storm has reached its crisis point. His relationship with his concubine torments his conscience, while his inability to commit to marriage frustrates his mother's hopes. His spiritual hunger wars with his physical desires. His intellectual achievements mock his moral failures. Suddenly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, he hears children playing in a nearby garden. Their voices carry across the wall, chanting a simple refrain: "Take up and read, take up and read." The words pierce his consciousness like arrows finding their target. Augustine later describes the moment as a divine command that could not be ignored. He rushes to where he has left a scroll containing Paul's letters. Opening it at random, his eyes fall upon Romans 13, verse 13. Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy. The words strike his heart with supernatural force, producing instant transformation that reshapes his life and, through his subsequent writings, influences Christian theology for the next millennium. Watch how this single encounter with Romans creates ripples that spread across centuries. Augustine's transformation leads to his ordination as a priest, his elevation as Bishop of Hippo, and his production of theological works that will guide the Church through the collapse of the Roman Empire and the emergence of medieval civilization. His City of God provides the framework for understanding divine sovereignty over human history. His Confessions creates the literary form of spiritual autobiography. His theological synthesis shapes Christian thought for 1,000 years. Fast forward through time to witness another pivotal moment. The year is 1517. In a tower study at Wittenberg University, a tormented German monk named Martin Luther wrestles with the same spiritual agony that consumed Augustine. Despite exhausting himself through religious performance, prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, confession, Luther finds no peace with God. The righteousness of God terrifies rather than comforts him, representing divine justice that condemns rather than divine mercy that saves. Then comes his breakthrough moment. Like lightning illuminating a dark landscape, Luther suddenly grasps the meaning of Romans 1, verse 17. The righteous shall live by faith. In an instant, his entire understanding of divine righteousness transforms. God's righteousness becomes not the standard that condemns him, but the gift that saves him. Divine justice becomes not the barrier that excludes him, but the bridge that includes him. The revelation explodes through Luther's consciousness, like a supernova releasing energy that has been building for millions of years. He later describes this moment as being born again and entering paradise through open gates. The righteousness of God, which had seemed like a roaring lion seeking to devour him, becomes a protective fortress surrounding him. Consider the magnitude of the historical explosion that follows. Luther's discovery ignites the Protestant Reformation, fracturing medieval Christianity and birthing hundreds of denominations committed to salvation by grace through faith alone. The printing press spreads his insights across Europe like dandelion seeds on spring wind. Nations choose sides based on theological principles derived from Paul's letter to Rome. Wars are fought over interpretations of justification by faith. The Reformation represents more than religious reform. It reshapes the entire trajectory of Western civilization. The principle that individuals can approach God directly without priestly mediation becomes the foundation for political ideas about individual liberty and democratic government. The emphasis on Scripture as the ultimate authority undermines claims to absolute power by both church and state. The doctrine of the priesthood of all believers creates the intellectual foundation for social equality. 2 centuries later, we encounter another transformative moment. The year is 1738. On Aldersgate Street in London, an Anglican minister named John Wesley sits reluctantly in a small religious meeting. Wesley has recently returned from a failed missionary venture in colonial Georgia, his confidence shattered by personal failures and spiritual confusion. Despite his theological education and religious ordination, he lacks the assurance of salvation that he sees in others. As the meeting progresses, someone begins reading from Luther's commentary on Romans. Wesley listens with growing attention as the reader describes the change that God works in the heart through faith in Christ. Then comes the moment that changes everything. As Wesley later records in his journal, he feels his heart strangely warmed and discovers assurance of salvation for the first time in his life. This Romans-inspired transformation launches the Methodist revival that sweeps through England and America like a spiritual wildfire. Wesley travels thousands of miles on horseback, preaching the gospel of grace to coal miners and factory workers, to prisoners and aristocrats, to anyone who will listen. His emphasis on personal holiness and social justice produces reforms that transform British society. Watch how Wesley's conversion ripples through history. The Methodist movement he founds becomes a major force in the abolition of slavery, the improvement of prison conditions, the education of the poor, and the care of orphans. Methodist circuit riders carry the gospel across the American frontier, establishing churches and schools in territories where no organized religion previously existed. The holiness emphasis Wesley derives from Romans produces revival movements that continue influencing Christianity today. Meanwhile, in the realm of scholarship, archaeologists begin uncovering evidence that illuminates Paul's world with unprecedented clarity. Excavations at Corinth reveal the exact inscription mentioning Erastus, the city treasurer whom Paul greets in Romans 16. This stone slab, carved in the 1st century, provides tangible connection between Paul's letter and the actual world in which it was written. Consider what these discoveries mean for our understanding of Romans. Papyrus fragments from Egypt preserve portions of Romans copied in the 2nd century, demonstrating the letter's early circulation throughout the Roman Empire. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii and Herculaneum shows us exactly what 1st century homes looked like where house churches gathered. Inscriptions from across the empire document the presence of Jewish communities that would have been the initial audiences for Paul's revolutionary message. These tangible connections bridge 2 millennia, allowing modern readers to touch the same truths that transformed ancient lives. The letter that seemed purely theological reveals itself as intensely practical, addressing real conflicts in real communities, facing real challenges. Paul's arguments about justification by faith prove not abstract doctrines but life-changing solutions to actual human problems. As centuries unfold, Romans continues finding new voices in each generation. Church fathers quote it extensively in their theological writings. Medieval monks copy it carefully in illuminated manuscripts. Renaissance scholars study it in original Greek manuscripts recovered from Byzantine libraries. Reformation theologians build entire theological systems upon its foundation. Each age discovers fresh applications, while earlier insights accumulate into an ever-expanding treasury of wisdom. The letter that began as pastoral correspondence to a specific church in a particular city reveals itself as eternal truth, applicable to every human heart in every historical circumstance. Like a great tree whose rings record the history of climate and seasons, Romans bears within its text the capacity to speak meaningfully to each new generation while maintaining its essential character. The voice that echoed in Augustine's garden continues calling across the centuries, ready to transform any heart willing to hear its revolutionary message. The echo continues, the transformation spreads, the revolution advances through time. As the 20th century dawns with its promise of progress and its shadow of unprecedented conflict, Paul's letter to Rome enters its most dramatic phase of influence. Like seeds that lie dormant through harsh winters only to burst into life when conditions prove favorable, the revolutionary principles Paul articulated in 1st century Corinth find fertile ground in the struggles and aspirations of the modern world. In a prison cell in Nazi Germany, the year 1943, a young pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer sits writing letters that will inspire generations of believers to courageously oppose injustice. Outside his cell, the Third Reich wages total war against anything that threatens its vision of Aryan supremacy. Inside the cell, Bonhoeffer draws strength from Romans 8. If God is for us, who can be against us? Consider the profound courage this requires. Bonhoeffer has witnessed the systematic persecution of Jews, the corruption of German churches, the transformation of his beloved homeland into a machine of hatred. He has seen fellow pastors capitulate to Nazi ideology, watched theological institutions become propaganda centers, observed the gospel of love replaced by the cult of race and nation. Yet Bonhoeffer chooses resistance. Not the dramatic resistance of military rebellion, but the quiet, steady resistance of moral conscience informed by Scripture. He participates in plots against Hitler's life, knowing that discovery means death. He refuses to compromise his faith, understanding that silence equals complicity. He writes from prison about the cost of discipleship, demonstrating through his own life what it means to follow Christ when following Christ leads to a Nazi gallows. Picture the moment when Romans 8 becomes more than theology, it becomes lifeline. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword? Paul's words, written to encourage first-century Roman believers facing Nero's persecution, speak directly to 20th-century German believers facing Hitler's terror. Bonhoeffer's Romans-inspired resistance costs him his life, but inspires generations of believers to courageously oppose injustice wherever they find it. His letters from prison, infused with insights from Paul's epistle, become required reading for Christians wrestling with the relationship between faith and politics, between discipleship and citizenship, between love and resistance. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another revolution unfolds in the American South. During the 1950s and 60s, African-American pastors discover in Romans the theological foundation for civil rights activism that will reshape an entire nation. Chief among these voices stands Martin Luther King Jr., whose understanding of Romans transforms both the strategy and the spirit of the movement for racial justice. Consider how Romans 12 shapes King's approach to resistance. Do not take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath. Paul writes, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. These verses become the blueprint for non-violent resistance that proves more powerful than armed rebellion, more effective than violent revolution. Watch how this principle plays out in the streets of Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma. When police dogs attack peaceful protesters, the protesters do not retaliate. When fire hoses knock down marching children, the children get up and keep marching. When angry mobs surround sit-in demonstrators, the demonstrators continue sitting in silence. The movement discovers that Romans 12 provides a strategy for social change as well as a theology for personal transformation. King's letter from Birmingham jail echoes Paul's reasoning from Romans with remarkable precision. Just as Paul argued that unjust laws contradict God's moral order, King contends that segregation laws violate divine justice and must be peacefully but firmly resisted. Both apostle and activist understand that submission to government stops where obedience to God begins. The civil rights movement demonstrates Romans' continuing power to reshape social structures. The same letter that helped transform the Roman Empire's rigid class distinctions now helps dismantle America's racial barriers. The gospel that broke down walls between Jew and Gentile proves equally effective at breaking down walls between black and white. Consider the global expansion of this influence. International missions organizations discover that Romans serves as their foundational text for cross-cultural evangelism. Paul's systematic presentation of the gospel transcends cultural barriers, proving as effective in Asian contexts as in African settings, as relevant in Latin American communities as in European societies. Wycliffe Bible Translators reports that Romans consistently ranks among the first biblical books translated into newly written languages. The letter provides theological vocabulary for cultures encountering Christianity for the first time, offering concepts that prove translatable across linguistic and cultural boundaries. The same truths that transformed first-century Mediterranean society continue transforming 21st-century global communities. In the field of psychology, researchers discover remarkable correlation between Paul's description of internal spiritual conflict in Romans 7 and contemporary understanding of addiction, compulsion, and behavioral change. The good that I want, I do not do, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing, Paul writes with startling psychological insight. Modern recovery programs adapt Paul's principles, recognizing that lasting transformation requires more than willpower. It demands supernatural intervention that addresses root causes rather than surface symptoms. Alcoholics Anonymous incorporates concepts of powerlessness, divine dependence, and spiritual awakening that mirror Paul's understanding of human limitation and divine grace. Consider how this validates Paul's anthropological insights. 15 centuries before modern psychology recognizes the unconscious mind, Paul describes the divided self with clinical accuracy. 18 centuries before neuroscience maps brain chemistry, Paul identifies the warfare between different aspects of human nature. 20 centuries before addiction, medicine recognizes the limits of human willpower. Paul declares that genuine transformation requires divine intervention. Economic development programs in impoverished regions discover practical applications of Romans' teachings about work, generosity, and community responsibility. Microfinance initiatives based on biblical stewardship principles demonstrate lower default rates and higher community impact than secular alternatives, validating Paul's insights about character-based economic relationships. Picture how this works in practice. In villages across Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, small groups of believers gather to study Romans while implementing loan programs based on biblical principles. They discover that Paul's teachings about mutual accountability, sacrificial giving, and honest work create the social foundation necessary for economic development. These programs succeed where government initiatives fail because they address the moral and spiritual dimensions of poverty alongside the economic factors. Romans provides not just financial strategy but character formation, not just economic theory but ethical transformation. The same letter that helped establish thriving Christian communities in the Roman Empire continues building thriving communities in the modern world. Environmental movements find unexpected support in Romans 8's description of creation groaning for redemption. Paul's vision of cosmic restoration provides theological foundation for environmental stewardship that transcends political boundaries. The apostle who wrote about justification by faith also wrote about creation's longing for liberation, offering hope for ecological healing alongside personal salvation. Climate activists discover that Romans offers both motivation for environmental action and comfort in environmental grief. The letter that proclaims individual transformation also anticipates cosmic renewal, promising that the God who makes all things new will ultimately restore all things completely. In universities around the world, Romans becomes the subject of intense scholarly investigation using tools and methods Paul could never have imagined. Computer analysis reveals literary patterns invisible to earlier generations. Archaeological discoveries continue illuminating the historical context of Paul's arguments. Sociological studies explore the letter's impact on various cultures and communities. Yet for all the scholarly apparatus brought to bear on Romans, its essential power remains unchanged. The same truths that transformed Augustine in his garden continue transforming lives in the modern world. The same grace that liberated Luther from spiritual bondage continues liberating captives today. The same hope that sustained Bonhoeffer in his prison cell continues sustaining believers facing persecution around the globe. Romans proves as contemporary as this morning's headlines and as relevant as tomorrow's challenges. The letter that reshaped the ancient world continues reshaping the modern world, one transformed life at a time. As we stand at the threshold of humanity's greatest adventure, the exploration of space, the mapping of consciousness, the engineering of life itself, Paul's letter to Rome reveals depths we are only beginning to fathom. Like astronomers discovering that familiar stars harbor planets capable of supporting life, Each generation uncovers new dimensions of Romans' relevance that previous eras could never have imagined. Consider our species as it ventures beyond Earth's atmosphere for the first time in 4 billion years of planetary history, as human feet touch lunar soil and robotic explorers traverse Martian landscapes. Fundamental questions emerge that Paul's letter anticipated with remarkable prescience. What does it mean to be human when humanity spreads across multiple worlds? How do concepts of divine creation and cosmic purpose translate to a universe that proves far vaster and stranger than our ancestors ever conceived? Romans provides theological framework for these unprecedented questions. Paul's vision of human beings as image-bearers of God transcends planetary boundaries. The same divine image that gives dignity and purpose to humans on Earth accompanies them to the moon, Mars, and beyond. The letter that proclaimed the gospel to every creature under heaven now applies to creatures venturing beyond heaven's visible boundaries. But observe how Romans addresses even more profound challenges emerging from genetic engineering and biotechnology. As scientists gain the power to edit DNA, enhance human capabilities, and potentially extend life indefinitely, questions about human nature become urgently practical. What constitutes the essential humanity that must be preserved? Which enhancements represent improvement, and which represent corruption? How do we navigate the ethical landscape of technologies that could transform our species itself? Paul's emphasis on human dignity as divine image-bearers provides crucial foundation for these debates. Romans declares that humans possess inherent worth not because of their capabilities or achievements, but because they reflect God's own character. This principle offers guidance for enhancement technologies, improvements that amplify human capacity to love, serve, and create, reflect divine purpose, while modifications that undermine human dignity or relationship with God move in dangerous directions. Consider artificial intelligence and robotics as they approach and potentially surpass human cognitive abilities. As machines become capable of reasoning, learning, and perhaps even creativity, the definition of personhood itself comes into question. What distinguishes the human mind created in God's image from artificial minds created by human ingenuity? How do we maintain human uniqueness and dignity in an age of intelligent machines? Romans offers perspective on these challenges through its understanding of humans as both material and spiritual beings. The letter recognizes that humans possess bodies subject to physical laws, yet also souls capable of relationship with the transcendent. This dual nature suggests that human uniqueness lies not merely in cognitive complexity, but in spiritual capacity, the ability to know and respond to God that may prove irreproducible in artificial systems. Global communication networks demonstrate Romans' continued capacity for transformation on an unprecedented scale. For the first time in history, Paul's letter can simultaneously reach isolated populations that traditional missionary methods could never touch. Digital translations make Romans accessible in thousands of languages, while audio and visual presentations overcome literacy barriers that have historically limited biblical access. Picture the implications. A tribal elder in the Amazon rainforest can hear Romans in his native tongue through satellite internet. A factory worker in industrial China can study Paul's letter during lunch breaks using smartphone apps. A refugee in a displacement camp can find hope in Romans through solar-powered tablets. The letter that began its journey on foot and horseback now travels at the speed of light to every corner of the globe. As climate change reshapes Earth's environment and forces humanity to reconsider its relationship with the natural world, Romans 8 provides theological grounding for environmental stewardship that transcends political divisions. Paul's description of creation groaning for redemption speaks directly to contemporary concerns about ecological degradation and species extinction. The Apostles' vision of cosmic restoration offers both motivation for environmental action and hope for environmental healing. Romans promises that the God who transforms human hearts will ultimately transform the entire created order, liberating it from corruption and decay. This hope encourages environmental stewardship while preventing environmental despair, offering believers reason to work for ecological healing without bearing sole responsibility for planetary salvation. Consider how Romans addresses the unprecedented challenge of human longevity. As medical advances potentially extend human lifespans to centuries or even millennia, questions about purpose and meaning become acute. What gives significance to life that might stretch across vast temporal scales? How do concepts of eternal purpose apply to humans who might live for geological ages? Paul's letter provides framework for understanding extended longevity within divine purpose. Romans declares that human life finds meaning not in duration, but in relationship with God and relationship with others. Whether human life spans decades or centuries, its significance flows from participation in God's eternal plan for creation's renewal. The letter that proclaimed transformation from mortality to immortality suddenly becomes intensely practical for humans who might achieve something approaching immortality through technological means. Romans reminds such beings that true immortality involves not merely extended existence, but transformed existence in harmony with divine purpose. Genetic research reveals the remarkable unity underlying human diversity, confirming Paul's insight that all humans share common ancestry and common nature. As scientists trace human migration patterns through DNA analysis, they discover that cultural and ethnic differences overlay fundamental biological unity that validates Paul's declaration that God made from one man every nation of mankind. This scientific confirmation of human unity provides powerful argument against racism, nationalism, and ethnic superiority. The same genetic evidence that reveals human evolutionary history also demonstrates human equality at the molecular level. Romans theological anthropology finds unexpected support from cutting-edge genetic research. As humanity confronts the possibility of encountering extraterrestrial intelligence, Romans offers theological framework for understanding our place in a universe that might teem with conscious beings. The letter's cosmic scope, its vision of creation's redemption, and God's universal sovereignty provides foundation for theological reflection about divine purposes that might encompass forms of life beyond Earth. Whether such beings exist remains unknown, but Romans prepares believers to think theologically about cosmic questions that earlier generations could barely imagine. The God revealed in Paul's letter proves large enough to encompass whatever forms of consciousness the universe might contain. Consider how Romans addresses the fundamental questions about consciousness itself. As neuroscience maps the brain with increasing precision, the letter's understanding of human nature as both material and spiritual offers perspective on consciousness that purely materialistic explanations cannot provide. Romans suggests that consciousness involves more than neural complexity. It reflects the divine image that transcends purely physical processes. Looking toward the far future, Romans anticipates questions we are only beginning to ask. As human civilization spreads across the galaxy and encounters challenges we cannot yet imagine, Paul's letter will continue providing eternal principles for temporal challenges. The truths about human nature, divine purpose, and cosmic destiny that Paul articulated will prove as relevant to starfaring humans as they were to first-century Romans. The letter that began in a Corinthian house 2,000 years ago continues its journey through human history, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential message. Each generation discovers fresh applications, while earlier insights accumulate into an ever-expanding treasury of wisdom that grows richer rather than diminished by time. Romans remains what it has always been: humanity's most comprehensive manual for understanding divine grace, personal transformation, and eternal purpose. Whether humanity's future unfolds on Earth or among the stars, in biological bodies or enhanced forms, in familiar cultures or unimaginable societies, Paul's letter will continue offering the same revolutionary truth that has transformed millions of lives across 20 centuries. God makes the ungodly righteous through faith in Christ. This message began its journey in ancient Corinth. It will complete its journey only when the universe itself finds its completion in the cosmic redemption Paul envisioned. The eternal letter continues, its eternal journey, carrying eternal truth to beings made for eternity, whether on earth or in the heavens, whether in time or beyond time, whether in this age or in the age to come. The revolution begun by grace will be completed by grace. The transformation started in individual hearts will culminate in cosmic renewal. The letter that changed everything continues changing everything it touches. Until every heart has heard, until every wrong is righted, until every tear is wiped away, until the kingdom comes and God's will is done, on earth as it is in heaven. The journey continues. The revolution advances. The eternal letter fulfills its eternal purpose in the eternal plan of the eternal God who makes all things new. Total word count to 20,000. Words Part 2. Architecture of Revolution. Romans' magnificent design. There exists in nature a phenomenon that never fails to inspire wonder, the spiral shell of the Nautilus. Chamber by chamber, the creature builds its home according the rule, to mathematical principles so precise that each new section follows the golden ratio with stunning accuracy. No architect's blueprint guides this construction, yet the result displays a perfection that has captivated mathematicians for centuries. Paul's letter to the Romans reveals a similar architectural mastery, not the instinctive genius of the Nautilus, but the deliberate craftsmanship of a mind trained in both Hebrew scholarship and Greek logic. As Phoebe carries this precious cargo along Roman roads, she bears more than correspondence. She carries a temple of words, constructed with mathematical precision and designed to stand for eternity. Consider the dimensions of Paul's masterpiece. 16 chapters, as carefully planned as the columns of the Pantheon. 431 verses, each positioned with the precision of stones in a Roman arch. 25,000 words in the original Greek, a length that required careful calculation in an age when papyrus was precious and scribes expensive. But numbers alone cannot capture the true marvel of this construction. Like the greatest architects who understand that form must serve function, Paul designs every element to support his revolutionary purpose. This is not merely a letter, it is intellectual architecture that will shelter human souls for millennia to come. Watch how the foundation takes shape. In those opening chapters, Romans 1 through 3, Paul becomes like a skilled prosecutor, presenting evidence before the highest court imaginable. But this is no ordinary trial. The defendants include every human being who has ever drawn breath, Jew and Gentile, slave and free, philosopher and peasant, emperor and beggar. The evidence mounts with inexorable force. Paul demonstrates that human morality, that noble attempt to construct righteousness through good behavior, crumbles under divine examination like sand castles before an incoming tide. Religious ritual, practiced with such devotion in temples across the empire, proves as inadequate as a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm. Even ethnic privilege, the treasured inheritance of being God's chosen people, offers no protection when divine justice examines the human heart. This cosmic courtroom drama unfolds with the relentless logic of natural law. Just as gravity affects all matter regardless of its origin or composition, Paul reveals that moral failure affects all humanity regardless of culture, education, or religious heritage. The verdict rings out across the centuries, guilty as charged. Every mouth stopped, every excuse silenced, every human defendant standing condemned before perfect justice. But then, consider this moment carefully comes the most dramatic reversal in all of literature. Like dawn breaking over a landscape that seemed forever trapped in darkness, Romans 4 through 8 unveil a revolution that transforms the cosmic courtroom into a celebration hall. Here, Paul introduces Abraham, that ancient patriarch who lived 430 years before Moses received the law on Mount Sinai. Picture Abraham under those Mesopotamian stars, gazing upward at promises that seemed impossible. No offspring to inherit the land, no visible evidence that God's word would prove true, yet Abraham believed, and God counted that faith as righteousness. The implications cascade through human history, like water rushing through a broken dam. If Abraham received righteousness before the law existed, then law-keeping cannot be the basis for divine acceptance. The temporal sequence proves everything. Grace precedes law, faith transcends performance, divine acceptance flows from divine character rather than human achievement. Paul's discovery solves the greatest puzzle in human existence. How can a perfect God accept imperfect people without compromising divine standards? The answer flows through a transaction so elegant in its simplicity, so revolutionary in its implications, that it rewrites the fundamental operating principles of every religion on earth. Picture it as an exchange that occurs in the eternal realm. Christ's perfect life, every thought pure, every word true, every action righteous, credits to the believer's account like gold deposited in a vault. Simultaneously, the believer's sin, every failure, every moral compromise, every broken commandment, transfers to Christ's account, punished completely on the cross. This divine transaction occurs not gradually, like the slow formation of a pearl, but instantly upon faith faster than lightning strikes, more immediate than the eye's response to light. In that moment, the believer's legal standing before God transforms from guilty to innocent, from condemned to justified, from enemy to beloved child. The psychological liberation proves as dramatic as the theological revolution. Imagine the release. Humans no longer stagger under the crushing weight of earning divine approval through religious performance. The treadmill of spiritual achievement stops. The scoreboard of moral comparison disappears. Instead, they discover that acceptance precedes performance, love motivates obedience, and grace empowers transformation. But Paul is far from finished with his architectural masterpiece. Having established the foundation of justification, he now builds the supporting structure of sanctification. The Holy Spirit enters the human heart like a master craftsman, taking residence in his workshop. From that moment forward, transformation begins, not the external modification attempted by human effort, but internal renovation powered by divine presence. Romans 5-8 reveal the mechanics of this transformation with the precision of a naturalist describing metamorphosis. The believer's new nature emerges gradually, like a butterfly developing within its chrysalis. Old patterns of thought and behavior give way to new ones. The heart that once pursued selfish pleasure now seeks divine purpose. The mind that once rebelled against moral law now delights in righteousness. Yet Paul acknowledges the complexity of this process with refreshing honesty. Like a scientist observing competing forces in nature, he describes the ongoing conflict between the old nature and the new. Romans 7 reads like a battlefield report from the human soul, where opposing armies wage war for control of the will. The good I want to do, I do not do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. This internal struggle resonates across centuries because it captures something universally human. Every honest person recognizes this battlefield. Every sincere seeker understands this frustration. Paul's transparency about his own moral failures provides comfort to countless generations who discover that even apostles wrestle with temptation. But Romans 8 bursts forth like sunrise after the longest night, revealing the ultimate victory that awaits every believer. The Holy Spirit provides power for overcoming sin, assurance for silencing doubt, and intercession for sustaining prayer. Nothing, not tribulation, Distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, or sword can separate believers from God's love. Now, Paul tackles the explosive question that threatens to tear early Christianity apart. What happens to God's chosen people, the Jews? Romans 9 through 11 navigate this theological minefield with the skill of a master diplomat crossing treacherous terrain. The problem appears intractable. If salvation comes through faith in Christ, and most Jews reject this message, has God abandoned his ancient promises? Paul's answer unfolds like a complex symphony, weaving themes of divine sovereignty, human responsibility, and mysterious grace into a harmonious whole. Israel's temporary rejection of the gospel serves a purpose. It opens the door for Gentile inclusion. Like a gardener pruning branches to encourage new growth, God uses Israel's unbelief to extend salvation to the nations. But this rejection is neither complete nor permanent. A remnant of Jewish believers remains, and ultimately all Israel will be saved as God fulfills his ancient covenant promises. The metaphor Paul employs captures the organic nature of this process. Gentile believers are like wild olive branches grafted into the cultivated olive tree of God's people. They draw life from ancient roots while contributing their own vitality to the tree's growth. This image would have startled both Jewish and Gentile readers. Jews discovering they must share their inheritance, Gentiles learning they enter an established covenant rather than starting fresh. Finally, Romans 12 through 16 provide the practical blueprint for transformed living. Like an architect providing detailed specifications after completing the foundation and framework, Paul shows how revolutionary theology produces revolutionary lifestyle in families, communities, and governments. The transformation begins with sacrifice, not the external rituals of temple worship, but the voluntary offering of the entire self to God's service. Bodies become living sacrifices, minds undergo renewal, and ordinary activities transform into acts of worship. Preparing meals, conducting business, raising children all become expressions of spiritual devotion. Spiritual gifts emerge as grace flows through transformed believers into their communities. Unlike human talents distributed by genetics or education, these supernatural abilities are divinely imparted for community benefit. Prophecy brings divine messages. Teaching illuminates truth. Service meets practical needs. Encouragement strengthens the discouraged. Giving addresses material lack. Leadership provides direction. Mercy offers compassion. These gifts operate like organs in a healthy body, diverse in function, but unified in purpose. No single believer possesses all gifts, just as no single organ performs all bodily functions. Interdependence becomes the foundation for community health, or humility, the prerequisite for effective service. Paul's practical wisdom extends into the complex realm of government relations. Writing during Nero's increasingly tyrannical reign, he nevertheless instructs believers to honor governmental authority as God's ordained instrument for maintaining social order. This delicate balance between submission and conscience will guide Christian political engagement through centuries of persecution, revolution, and democratic development. The letter concludes with personal greetings that reveal the rich diversity of early Roman Christianity. Priscilla and Aquila, that remarkable ministry couple who risked their lives for Paul's sake. Epaenetus, the first convert in Asia. Mary, who worked hard for the Roman believers. Andronicus and Junia, fellow prisoners who were apostles before Paul's conversion. 26 names, representing the faces behind the theology, the human hearts that would receive and implement these revolutionary truths. As Phoebe approaches Rome with this architectural marvel carefully protected in her travel pouch, she carries more than papyrus and ink. She bears the blueprint for a new kind of human community, one where barriers crumble before grace, where diversity strengthens rather than divides, where love transcends law, and where ordinary people discover extraordinary purpose. The architecture is complete. The foundation has been laid, the framework erected, the specifications detailed. Now comes the test of time. Will this structure endure? Will it shelter human souls through the storms of persecution, the earthquakes of cultural change, and the floods of intellectual challenge that lie ahead? The answer awaits in the heart of the empire itself, where 2,000 believers prepare to receive a letter that will reshape their understanding of God, themselves, and their place in the grand design of human history. Part 3. The Great Breakthrough. Grace defeats law forever. In the annals of human discovery, certain moments stand apart like lightning illuminating a darkened landscape. The instant when Archimedes grasped the principle of displacement and cried, "Eureka!" The moment when Darwin conceived natural selection while reading Malthus. The night when Einstein glimpsed the curvature of space-time. These breakthroughs reshape not merely our understanding, but our entire perception of reality itself. Paul's discovery, carefully articulated in his letter to Rome, represents perhaps the most revolutionary insight in human history. In a single sentence that detonates like intellectual lightning across the ancient world, he declares that God makes the ungodly righteous through faith alone, apart from works of law. This statement obliterates the fundamental assumption underlying every religion in human history, that people must earn divine favor through performance. Consider the magnitude of this. Revelation. Since the dawn of consciousness, human beings have intuited that something stands between them and ultimate reality. A barrier that demands crossing, a debt that requires payment, a standard that must be met. Every civilization has developed elaborate systems for bridging this gap. Sacrificial rituals, moral codes, religious ceremonies, philosophical disciplines. The methods varied, but the underlying principle remained constant. Divine acceptance must be earned. Paul's breakthrough shatters this universal assumption with the force of tectonic plates shifting beneath an ancient mountain range. The entire landscape of human spiritual striving suddenly reveals itself as unnecessary, not merely difficult or imperfect, but fundamentally beside the point. The discovery emerges from Paul's careful observation of Abraham, that ancient patriarch whose story illuminates the nature of divine-human relationship like a fossil revealing evolutionary truth. Picture Abraham in the Mesopotamian night, surrounded by stars that sparkle like scattered diamonds across the cosmic vault. God has just promised that his descendants will outnumber those celestial lights. Despite the biological impossibility, Abraham is 99 years old, Sarah is barren, and the promise seems to mock physical reality. Yet Abraham believes, not because the evidence supports faith, but despite evidence that contradicts it. Not because believing feels comfortable, but because the one who promises has proven trustworthy in smaller matters. And in that moment of pure trust, when sight surrenders to faith, when human logic bows before divine promise, something extraordinary occurs. God counts Abraham's faith as righteousness. Not faith plus good works, not faith verified by moral achievement, not faith demonstrated through religious ritual, faith alone. Pure and simple, credits to Abraham's account like treasure deposited in a heavenly vault. Now observe the chronological evidence that makes Paul's case irrefutable. Abraham received this gift of righteousness approximately 430 years before Moses received the law on Mount Sinai, 4 centuries before the 10 Commandments were carved in stone, before the sacrificial system was established, before the elaborate religious machinery of Judaism began operating. Abraham was declared righteous before any of the performance-based requirements existed. The implications cascade through human history, like an avalanche reshaping an entire mountainside. If Abraham received righteousness before the law existed, then law-keeping cannot be the basis for divine acceptance. The temporal sequence proves everything. Grace precedes law, faith transcends performance, divine acceptance flows from divine character rather than human achievement. But Paul's insight penetrates even deeper into the mystery of divine-human relationship. He reveals the mechanics of justification with the precision of a scientist, explaining natural phenomena. The transaction involves a double imputation, a theological term that describes something as practical as a bank transfer, yet as profound as the exchange of souls. Picture Christ's perfect life as a treasure beyond calculation, every thought pure as mountain spring water, every word true as mathematical axioms, every action righteous as the movement of planets in their courses. This treasure, accumulated through 33 years of flawless existence, becomes available for transfer. When someone exercises faith in Christ, that perfect record credits instantly to their account. Simultaneously, the believer's moral debt, every failure, every compromise, every broken commandment, accumulated over a lifetime of imperfection, transfers to Christ's account. This debt, which justice demands must be paid, was settled completely on the cross. The punishment fell upon the sinless substitute, satisfying divine justice while extending divine mercy. The exchange occurs not gradually, like the slow formation of a stalactite, but instantaneously faster than synapses fire in the human brain, more immediate than light traveling from source to destination. In that moment, the believer's legal standing before God transforms completely, from guilty to innocent, from condemned to justified, from enemy to beloved child. The psychological implications prove as revolutionary as the theological ones. Imagine the liberation. Humans no longer stagger under the crushing weight of earning divine approval through endless religious performance. The treadmill of spiritual achievement stops spinning. The scoreboard of moral comparison disappears. The exhausting competition to prove worthiness before heaven ends forever. Instead, they discover something that transforms every aspect of human experience. Acceptance precedes performance. God's love motivates obedience rather than being earned by it. Grace empowers transformation rather than being attracted by it. Divine approval becomes the foundation for right living rather than its goal. This discovery births the revolutionary concept of unconditional divine love, a force that will reshape art, literature, politics, and social reform for the next 2 millennia. Artists will paint scenes of divine mercy with brushstrokes that capture celestial tenderness. Musicians will compose hymns that echo the melodies of grace across cathedral spaces and simple chapels alike. Reformers will find in this truth the motivation to challenge systems that oppress the powerless and marginalize the forgotten. But perhaps most remarkably, Paul's breakthrough provides the solution to humanity's greatest existential puzzle. How can a perfect God accept imperfect people without compromising divine standards? This question has tormented philosophers and theologians since consciousness began grappling with ultimate reality. If God truly embodies perfect justice, how can divine love embrace the unjust? If divine holiness cannot tolerate moral contamination, how can divine mercy extend to the morally compromised? Paul's answer flows through substitution, a concept as elegant in its simplicity as the laws governing planetary motion, yet as profound as the forces binding atomic nuclei. Christ becomes the perfect representative of humanity, living the life humans should have lived and dying the death humans deserve to die. Divine justice is satisfied through punishment. Divine mercy is expressed through substitution. Divine holiness is maintained through perfection, and divine love is demonstrated through sacrifice. This substitutionary principle operates throughout nature, though rarely with such cosmic significance. When lightning strikes a tree, the electrical energy follows the path of least resistance, often sparing surrounding vegetation. When a parent bird feigns injury to draw predators away from the nest, substitution protects the vulnerable. but no natural analogy, captures the complete wonder of divine substitution, where perfection voluntarily exchanges places with imperfection to accomplish universal redemption. The breakthrough reverberates through every culture and religious system on earth. Suddenly, the elaborate structures humans have constructed to reach God, the rituals, the ceremonies, the moral achievements, the spiritual disciplines reveal themselves as magnificent but unnecessary. Like scaffolding around a building under construction, these systems may have served temporary purposes, but they become obsolete when the foundation of grace is complete. Yet Paul's discovery does not diminish the importance of moral living or spiritual growth. Rather, it transforms their motivation and empowerment. Righteousness becomes the fruit of justification rather than its root. Good works flow from grateful hearts rather than guilty consciences. Spiritual discipline grows from love's desire to please rather than fear's desperation to appease. Consider how this breakthrough addresses the universal human experience of moral failure. Every honest person recognizes the gap between aspiration and achievement, between the good they intend and the good they accomplish. The perfectionist tormented by standards they cannot meet, the addict enslaved by compulsions they cannot overcome, the well-intentioned person whose actions consistently fall short of their ideals, all discover in Paul's revelation that divine acceptance does not depend upon closing these gaps through human effort. Instead, they learn that God bridges the gap from his side through grace, making righteousness a gift rather than an achievement. This transforms the entire psychology of spiritual growth. Failure becomes an opportunity for grace rather than evidence of unworthiness. Weakness becomes a gateway for divine strength rather than a barrier to divine acceptance. The journey of transformation begins from a position of security rather than striving. The implications extend far beyond individual experience into the realm of human community. If divine acceptance comes through faith rather than performance, then no person can claim superiority over another based on moral achievement or religious activity. The Pharisee cannot look down upon the tax collector. The priest cannot dismiss the prostitute. The religious insider cannot exclude the cultural outsider. This leveling effect proves as socially revolutionary as it is theologically profound. In a world stratified by class, ethnicity, education, and achievement, Paul's discovery creates the possibility of genuine human equality. All have sinned and fallen short of divine glory. All require the same grace. All receive the same gift through the same faith. The ground at the foot of the cross is perfectly level. As Phoebe continues her journey toward Rome, carrying this revolutionary truth closer to the heart of the empire, she bears more than theological insight. She carries a force that will reshape the fundamental structures of human society. Slaves will discover dignity as image-bearers of God. Women will find value beyond cultural stereotypes. Outsiders will gain entrance to communities that welcome them as family. The breakthrough is complete. The universal human quest for divine acceptance has been resolved not through human achievement, but through divine provision. Grace has defeated law forever, not by destroying moral standards, but by fulfilling them through perfect substitution. The impossible has become possible, the unreachable has drawn near, and the door to divine relationship stands permanently open to all who will believe. The revolution has begun. Soon, this truth will echo through Roman streets and Christian gatherings, transforming lives with the same lightning-swift power that transformed its discoverer on a dusty road to Damascus. Part 4. Living the Revolution. Grace transforms everything. In the intricate ecosystem of a coral reef, transformation never occurs in isolation. When conditions change, when water temperature shifts, or nutrient levels fluctuate, the entire community responds. Fish alter their feeding patterns, coral polyps adjust their symbiotic relationships, and microscopic organisms adapt their metabolic processes. What affects one element ripples through the whole system, creating new patterns of life that reflect the changed environment. Paul's revolutionary discovery of grace operates with similar comprehensive power. Having established that God makes the ungodly righteous through faith alone, he now demonstrates how this theological transformation ripples through every aspect of human existence. Like a master naturalist documenting the far-reaching effects of environmental change, Paul reveals how grace-based living revolutionizes everything from daily routines to governmental relationships. The transformation begins where all authentic change must begin within the human heart itself. Paul calls this internal revolution sacrifice, but not the external rituals that his readers knew from temple worship. Instead, he describes something far more comprehensive, the voluntary offering of the entire self to God's service. Picture this sacrifice unfolding like the metamorphosis of a butterfly. Just as the caterpillar's entire cellular structure dissolves and reorganizes within the chrysalis, the believer's life undergoes complete reconstruction. Bodies become living sacrifices, not dead offerings burned on ancient altars, but vibrant presentations of life dedicated to divine purposes. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement becomes an act of worship. This transformation proves as thorough as it is voluntary. Minds undergo renewal like landscapes after spring rain, washing away old patterns of thought and cultivating new ones. What once seemed valuable appears worthless. What once attracted now repels. What once motivated no longer compels. The believer discovers that their entire value system has shifted, like a compass needle finding true magnetic north after years of pointing toward false destinations. Observe how this internal change expresses itself in the ordinary rhythms of daily life. Preparing meals transforms from mere sustenance into an act of stewardship, recognizing that every ingredient represents divine provision. Conducting business becomes an opportunity to demonstrate integrity, treating customers and competitors with the honor that reflects divine character. Raising children evolves into sacred partnership with the Creator, shaping eternal souls rather than merely training temporary behaviors. But grace's transforming power extends far beyond individual experience into the realm of community life. Here, Paul reveals one of nature's most beautiful principles, operating in spiritual dimensions, diversity, strengthening the whole rather than fragmenting it. Spiritual gifts emerge as grace flows through transformed believers in their communities. Unlike human talents distributed by genetics or education, these supernatural abilities are divinely imparted for community benefit. Watch how they operate like specialized organs in a healthy body, each performing unique functions while contributing to the organism's overall vitality. Prophecy brings fresh revelation, like lightning illuminating previously hidden terrain. Teaching clarifies truth, like sunlight revealing the intricate structure of forest canopies. Service meets practical needs, like root systems drawing nutrients from soil to nourish the entire plant. Encouragement strengthens the discouraged, like gentle rain reviving drought-stressed vegetation. Giving addresses material lack, like streams flowing from abundant sources to irrigate barren ground. Leadership provides direction, like experienced guides navigating treacherous mountain passes. Mercy offers compassion, like healing springs that soothe wounded creatures. Notice the remarkable principle Paul establishes. No single believer possesses all gifts, just as no single organ performs all bodily functions. This divine distribution creates beautiful interdependence within Christian communities. The gifted teacher needs the practical servant. The generous giver requires the discerning leader. The compassionate mercy shower depends upon the truth-telling prophet. Each person's unique contribution becomes essential for community health. This interdependence cultivates humility like nothing else can. When believers recognize that their gifts are divinely given rather than personally achieved, competition gives way to cooperation. Jealousy transforms into appreciation. Pride melts into gratitude. The community begins functioning like a symphony orchestra, where each instrument's distinct voice contributes to harmonious music that no single musician could create alone. Paul's practical wisdom extends into the complex realm of relationships, where grace must navigate the feti, treacherous waters of human personality, cultural difference, and conflicting expectations. Here, he demonstrates how theological principles translate into behavioral transformation with the precision of a scientist documenting cause and effect relationships. Love becomes the governing force, but not the sentimental emotion often mistaken for authentic love. Paul describes love as a commitment to act in others' best interests regardless of personal cost or convenience. This love operates like gravity consistently, persistently, and universally. It holds relationships together when attraction fades, when differences emerge, when conflicts arise. This transforming love expresses itself through specific behaviors that astonish observers, blessing those who persecute you, weeping with those who weep, rejoicing with those who rejoice, associating with the lowly rather than seeking status among the proud. These actions defy natural human instincts like salmon swimming upstream, creating communities that operate by different laws than the surrounding culture. Now observe how Paul's practical wisdom ventures into one of the most challenging territories for early Christians: relationships with governmental authority. Writing during Nero's increasingly tyrannical reign, when Caesar's paranoia threatens anyone suspected of divided loyalty, Paul nevertheless instructs believers to honor governmental authority as God's ordained instrument for maintaining social order. This teaching requires the delicate balance of a mountain climber navigating a narrow ridge with precipitous drops on both sides. On one side lies the danger of absolute submission that ignores conscience. On the other lurks the peril of anarchistic rebellion that destroys community stability. Paul charts a course between these extremes, establishing principles that will guide Christian political engagement through centuries of persecution, revolution, and democratic development. Government authority derives legitimacy from divine appointment, Paul explains, but this appointment includes specific purposes: rewarding good, punishing evil, and maintaining peace that allows human flourishing. When government fulfills these functions, believers submit gladly. When it contradicts divine law, believers obey God rather than man, but they do so with respectful resistance rather than violent rebellion. This balance proves as crucial in democratic societies as in authoritarian ones. Citizens who understand their dual citizenship, earthly and heavenly, engage politics with passionate commitment tempered by eternal perspective. They work for justice while trusting divine sovereignty. They vote their convictions while loving their opponents. They advocate for the marginalized while respecting institutional processes. Perhaps nowhere does Paul's practical wisdom shine more brilliantly than in his approach to the explosive tensions threatening to tear early Christianity apart. Relationship between Jewish and Gentile believers. Here, two distinct ecosystems, one ancient and established, the other new and rapidly expanding, must learn to coexist within the same spiritual environment. The conflict centers around practices that seem minor to modern observers, but carried enormous cultural significance in the first century: dietary laws, Sabbath observance, and festival celebrations. For Jewish believers, these practices represent centuries of identity formation, family tradition, and covenant relationship with God. For Gentile believers, they appear as foreign impositions that complicate the simplicity of grace-based living. Paul's solution demonstrates the genius of applying grace principles to practical problems. Rather than mandating uniformity, he establishes principles for unity amid diversity. Each believer must follow their own conscience regarding disputable matters, but no believer may judge another for different convictions. The strong must not despise the weak, The weak must not condemn the strong. All must pursue what builds up the community rather than what satisfies personal preferences. This approach creates space for cultural diversity within spiritual unity, like a healthy ecosystem supporting multiple species with different needs and behaviors. Jewish believers can maintain their ancestral practices as expressions of gratitude to God. Gentile believers can embrace freedom from these requirements as celebrations of grace. Both approaches honor God when motivated by love rather than legalism. Paul concludes his practical instructions with personal greetings that reveal the rich diversity of early Roman Christianity. 26 names representing a remarkable cross-section of society. Priscilla and Aquila, that Jewish Christian couple who fled Rome during Claudius's expulsion order, but now return as church leaders. Epaenetus, the first convert in the province of Asia. Mary, whose hard work for the Roman believers demonstrates women's significant ministry roles. Andronicus and Junia, fellow prisoners who were recognized as apostles before Paul's own conversion. These names represent faces behind the theology, human hearts that will receive and implement these revolutionary truths. They include slaves and free persons, Jews and Gentiles, men and women, natives and foreigners, all united not by social status or ethnic heritage, but by shared faith in Christ and common commitment to grace-based living. As Phoebe approaches the gates of Rome, carrying Paul's letter with its comprehensive blueprint for transformed living, she bears more than theological instruction. She carries the practical formula for creating communities that reflect divine character in human relationships. These principles will enable believers to thrive in palace chambers and prison cells, in seasons of prosperity and periods of persecution, in cultures that welcome Christianity and societies that oppose it. The revolution in living has been detailed. Grace has been shown to transform not merely individual hearts but entire communities, creating new patterns of human relationship that witness to divine reality. Soon, Roman believers will discover how theological truth translates into daily practice, how divine grace empowers human transformation, and how revolutionary principles create revolutionary communities that astonish a watching world. The practical blueprint is complete. Now comes the testing ground. Will these grace-based principles prove sustainable in the complex environment of imperial Rome, where political pressure, social stratification, and cultural diversity create challenges that will test every aspect of this revolutionary way of life? Part 5. Voices through the centuries. Romans, echoes across time. There is something almost mystical about the way certain sounds carry across vast distances and through long periods of time. A whale's song can travel thousands of miles through ocean depths, reaching members of its species separated by entire continents. The rumble of an avalanche echoes through mountain valleys long after the snow has settled. And sometimes, very rarely, human words achieve this same extraordinary resonance, traveling not just across space, but through time itself, speaking as clearly to distant generations as they did to their original hearers. Paul's letter to the Romans possesses this remarkable quality. Written in a Corinthian house in the year 57, it has echoed through history with undiminished power, finding responsive hearts in every subsequent century. Like a master frequency that causes crystal glasses to ring in harmony, this letter continues producing transformations that mirror its original effect with stunning precision. Consider the extraordinary scene that unfolds in a Milan garden during the year 396. A brilliant young professor named Augustine sits beneath the spreading branches of a fig tree, his face wet with tears of frustration and spiritual emptiness. At 32, he has achieved everything the Roman world values: rhetorical brilliance that draws crowds to his lectures, intellectual prowess that impresses the empire's most educated minds, and social connections that promise continued advancement. Yet success tastes like ashes in his mouth. His personal life lies in shambles, a decade-long relationship with a woman he loves but cannot marry due to social conventions, a son born outside wedlock, a heart torn between sensual pleasure and spiritual longing. He has tried philosophy, seeking wisdom in Plato's idealism and Cicero's ethics. He has experimented with Manichaeism, attracted by its sophisticated explanations for the problem of evil. Nothing satisfies the deep hunger in his soul. On this particular afternoon, Augustine's internal conflict reaches crisis point. Throwing himself beneath the fig tree, he weeps with the desperation of a man who has tried everything and found nothing that truly works. "How long, how long?" he cries out to heaven. "Tomorrow and tomorrow? Why not now? Why not this very hour, an end to my uncleanness?" Then something remarkable occurs. From a neighbouring house comes the sound of children playing, their voices carrying a simple chant, "Take up and read, take up and read." The words pierce Augustine's consciousness like an arrow finding its target. He remembers hearing that many disciples received divine guidance through randomly opening scripture, allowing providence to direct their eyes to relevant passages. Augustine rises and walks to where his copy of Paul's letters lies on a bench. Opening the scroll, his eyes fall immediately upon Romans 13, verse 13. "Let us walk properly, as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarrelling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires." The words strike his heart with the force of lightning illuminating a dark landscape. In that instant, as immediate as sunrise dispelling night, Augustine's spiritual struggle ends. The compulsions that have enslaved him for years lose their power. The guilt that has tormented his conscience disappears. Peace flows through his soul like healing water through parched ground. This transformation proves as complete as it is sudden. Augustine abandons his career in rhetoric, dedicates himself to Christian ministry, and begins writing theological works that will shape Christian thought for the next millennium. His Confessions becomes literature's most influential autobiography. His City of God provides the framework for understanding church-state relationships that guides medieval civilization. His insights into grace and predestination influence everyone from Thomas Aquinas to John Calvin. But notice how Augustine's encounter with Romans echoes Paul's own Damascus Road experience. Both involve sudden supernatural illumination that transforms persecutors into champions. Both occur through direct divine intervention in moments of crisis. Both produce lifelong dedication to spreading the very message they once opposed or ignored. The same letter that recorded Paul's revolutionary discovery continues producing similar revolutions in responsive hearts. 1,000 years later, a different kind of crisis unfolds in the Tower Study of Wittenberg University. A tormented German monk named Martin Luther wrestles with the same spiritual agony that consumed Augustine, the terrifying question of how sinful humans can stand before a holy God without being consumed by divine wrath. Luther has tried everything the medieval church prescribes: confession of sins with microscopic thoroughness, penance performed with excruciating care, fasting that weakens his body, prayer vigils that exhaust his mind, pilgrimages that drain his resources. Yet peace remains as elusive as morning, mist. The harder he strives for righteousness, the more aware he becomes of his moral failures. The more intensely he seeks God's approval, the more convinced he grows of divine displeasure. As Luther prepares lectures on Romans for his university students, he encounters the same passage that will revolutionize his understanding. Romans 1, verse 17. "For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." Initially, this verse torments rather than comforts him. The phrase righteousness of God seems to describe the divine attribute that condemns sinners rather than saves them. Luther later recalls, "I hated that word righteousness of God, which, according to the custom and use of all teachers, I had been taught to understand philosophically regarding the formal or active righteousness, as they called it, with which God is righteous and punishes the unrighteous and unjust." But as Luther meditates on Paul's argument, the truth begins to dawn like sunrise breaking over snow-covered peaks. The righteousness that the gospel reveals is not God's righteousness against sinners, but God's righteousness for sinners, the righteousness that God gives as a gift through faith in Christ. This divine righteousness does not condemn, it justifies. It does not exclude, it welcomes. It does not demand, it provides. The revelation explodes through Luther's consciousness, with such force that he later describes feeling as if he had been born again and had entered paradise through open gates. The psychological liberation proves as dramatic as the theological discovery. Luther writes, "Here I felt that I was altogether born again and had entered paradise itself through open gates." This Romans-inspired transformation ignites the Protestant Reformation, fracturing medieval Christianity and giving birth to hundreds of denominations committed to salvation by grace through faith alone. Luther's discovery spreads across Europe like wildfire through dry timber, finding responsive hearts in every nation. The same letter that comforted Augustine in his Milan garden now liberates millions from the burden of earning divine favor through religious performance. 2 centuries later, Romans works another of its characteristic transformations in an unlikely setting. On a May evening in 1738, an Anglican minister named John Wesley sits reluctantly in a small meeting on Aldersgate Street in London. Wesley has grown up in the church, graduated from Oxford University, and even served as a missionary to the American colonies. Yet despite his religious pedigree and ministerial experience, he lacks personal assurance of salvation. The evening proves unpromising. Wesley attends the meeting against his inclinations, drawn by curiosity rather than expectation. The speaker reads from Luther's commentary on Romans, explaining the great reformer's insights about justification by faith. As Wesley listens to this exposition of Paul's revolutionary discovery, something extraordinary occurs. Wesley later records the moment with precise detail. About 9:15, while he was describing the change which God works in the heart through faith in Christ, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust in Christ, Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance was given me that he had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. This strangely warmed heart launches the Methodist revival that sweeps through England and America like a great awakening. Wesley travels throughout Britain, preaching to crowds of thousands who gather in fields and town squares. His emphasis on personal holiness and social responsibility produces remarkable transformations. Prisons are reformed, education is extended to the poor, slavery faces organized opposition, and countless individuals discover personal relationship with God. The Methodist movement Wesley leads demonstrates Romans' power to transform not merely individual hearts but entire societies. Methodist societies establish schools, orphanages, hospitals, and relief organizations. They advocate for the marginalized and challenge systems that oppress the powerless. They prove that grace-based theology produces grace-motivated service that addresses human need in practical, measurable ways. Modern archaeological discoveries continue adding their voice to this chorus of testimony across the centuries. Excavations at Corinth reveal the exact inscription mentioning Erastus, the city treasurer whom Paul greets in Romans 16 verse 23. The marble pavement reads, "Erastus, curator of public buildings, laid this pavement at his own expense." Here, carved in stone, stands tangible connection between Paul's letter and the historical reality it describes. Papyrus fragments from Egypt preserve portions of Romans copied in the 2nd century, demonstrating the letter's rapid circulation throughout the Roman Empire. These ancient manuscripts, discovered in rubbish heaps and mummy wrappings, bridge nearly 2 millennia of human history. When scholars decipher these fragmentary texts, they touch the same words that transformed Augustine, Luther, Wesley, and countless others across the centuries. Each discovery adds another voice to the testimony, another echo to the resonance that continues reverberating through time. Carbon dating confirms the manuscript's antiquity. Paleographic analysis verifies their textual accuracy. Archaeological evidence validates their historical context. The letter that changed Paul's contemporary world continues demonstrating its transformative power through objective, measurable evidence. Perhaps most remarkably, Romans continues producing the same characteristic effects in modern hearts that it generated in ancient ones. The businessman who discovers that success cannot satisfy spiritual hunger, the intellectual who learns that human wisdom cannot bridge the gap between earth and heaven, the religious person who realizes that performance cannot earn divine acceptance, the skeptic who encounters grace and finds their worldview revolutionized. These modern transformations follow patterns as consistent as natural laws. Like the migration routes that birds follow across thousands of miles of unfamiliar terrain, Romans guide seekers from spiritual emptiness to fulfillment, from guilt to forgiveness, from slavery to freedom, from death to life. The destinations remain constant, though the starting points vary infinitely. As this great chorus of voices testifies across 20 centuries of human experience, Paul's letter reveals its true nature. More than theology, more than philosophy, more than religious instruction, Romans functions as a force of transformation that operates with the consistency of gravity and the reliability of sunrise. It continues echoing through time because it addresses needs as constant as human nature itself, the need for acceptance, purpose, forgiveness, and hope. The echo continues. In hospital rooms where patients face mortality, Romans speaks of life beyond death. In courtrooms where justice seems absent, it reveals divine justice that never fails. In broken homes where relationships crumble, it demonstrates love that never ends. In prisons where despair reigns, it proclaims freedom that no wall can contain. Each generation discovers the letter anew, finding in its ancient words solutions to contemporary problems, answers to modern questions, hope for current despair. The voice that first spoke from a Corinthian house continues speaking, as clear and powerful as ever, waiting for the next heart ready to hear its transforming message. Part 6. Romans reshapes the modern world. Numban revolutionary truth in action. In the depths of winter, when forests appear lifeless and fields lie dormant beneath snow, an extraordinary process unfolds beneath the snow surface. Root systems continue their hidden work, drawing nutrients from soil, preparing for spring's inevitable return. What seems like stillness masks intense activity. What appears to be death nurtures new life. And when conditions align, this underground preparation bursts forth in displays of growth that transform entire landscapes. Paul's letter to the Romans has functioned with similar quiet persistence throughout human history. During periods when its revolutionary truths seemed dormant, forgotten by institutions, ignored by intellectuals, dismissed by cultural elites, its principles continued working beneath the surface of human consciousness. Then, in moments of crisis, when conditions demanded fresh solutions, Romans has erupted with transformative power that reshapes entire civilizations. The 20th century witnessed perhaps the most dramatic demonstration of this pattern, as darkness descended across Europe in the form of totalitarian ideologies that reduced human beings to statistics and treated conscience as an inconvenience. Romans provided the theological foundation for resistance that changed the course of history. In a stark prison cell in Tegel, Berlin, during the year 1943, a young German pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer draws strength from words Paul wrote 19 centuries earlier. The cold stone walls cannot contain the warmth that flows from Romans 8 verse 31. If God is for us, who can be against us? As Bonhoeffer reflects on these words, he finds courage that enables him to maintain hope despite circumstances that would crush ordinary spirits. Bonhoeffer's journey to this cell reads like a parable of intellectual integrity confronting moral challenge. Born into Germany's educated elite, he could have easily accommodated himself to Nazi ideology through the theological compromises that satisfied so many of his contemporaries. The regime offered attractive incentives, prestigious positions for those who aligned their teaching with state doctrine, comfortable silence for those who avoided controversial topics, prosperous careers for those who focused on personal spirituality while ignoring social injustice. Instead, Bonhoeffer discovered in Romans the theological foundation for resistance that cost him everything. Paul's teaching that every human being bears God's image provides unshakable ground for opposing ideologies that classify people according to race, nationality, or political usefulness. Paul's insistence that Christian obedience to earthly authority has limits establishes the principle that enables believers to say no when governments demand actions that violate divine law. As Bonhoeffer participates in the conspiracy to remove Hitler from power, he draws repeatedly upon Romans' principles. Grace does not eliminate the need for justice, it demands it. Divine forgiveness does not preclude human responsibility, it empowers it. Christian love does not require the acceptance of evil, it compels active opposition. The letters Bonhoeffer writes from prison reflect this Romans-inspired courage. To his fiancée, he writes of finding God in the midst of suffering. To his parents, he speaks of peace that transcends understanding. To his fellow conspirators, he maintains that their cause serves divine purposes, even if it costs their lives. His example demonstrates how Paul's letter continues empowering moral courage in humanity's darkest hours. Bonhoeffer's execution in April 1945 does not end his influence, it amplifies it. His writings, preserved and published after the war, inspire generations of believers to courageously oppose injustice wherever they encounter it. The theological insights he drew from Romans become foundational for Christian resistance movements across the globe, proving that truth possesses its own form of immortality. Across the Atlantic, during the 1950s and 60s, African-American pastors discover in Romans the theological framework for civil rights activism that will transform American society. The connection proves neither accidental nor superficial. It emerges from careful study of Paul's revolutionary principles applied to contemporary injustice. Martin Luther King Jr., studying in the comfortable academic environment of Boston University, encounters Romans 12, verses 19 through 21 with fresh understanding. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. These verses provide the blueprint for non-violent resistance that becomes the hallmark of the civil rights movement. Paul's strategy proves as practical as it is principled, opposing injustice through methods that expose rather than perpetuate evil, conquering hatred through love, transforming enemies into allies through consistent righteousness. King's letter from Birmingham jail echoes Paul's reasoning from Romans with remarkable precision. When criticized for breaking local laws that enforce segregation, King argues that unjust laws contradict God's moral order and must be peacefully but firmly resisted. Just as Paul taught that earthly authority derives legitimacy from divine appointment, King maintains that laws gain moral authority only when they align with eternal principles of justice. The movement King leads demonstrates Romans' power to transform not merely individual hearts but entire social systems. Bus boycotts, lunch counter sit-ins, freedom rides, and peaceful marches prove that grace-motivated activism can accomplish what violence cannot, changing hearts as well as laws, transforming oppressors as well as liberating the oppressed. When King stands before the Lincoln Memorial in August 1963, delivering his "I Have a Dream" speech to 250,000 people, his vision reflects Romans' revolutionary principles. He dreams of a society where people are judged not by external characteristics, but by internal character, where divine image supersedes human categories, where justice flows like mighty waters across landscapes previously divided by prejudice. The civil rights movement's success validates Paul's ancient insights about the relationship between theological truth and social transformation. When believers truly grasp that all humans bear God's image, racial prejudice becomes not merely socially unacceptable but theologically impossible. When churches embrace Paul's teaching about the unity of believers regardless of ethnic background, segregation loses its religious justification. When society acknowledges the dignity Romans attributes to every person, discriminatory laws reveal themselves as contradictions of fundamental truth. Meanwhile, in contexts far removed from American civil rights struggles, international missions organizations discover that Romans provides the most effective foundation for cross-cultural evangelism. Paul's systematic presentation of the gospel transcends cultural barriers with remarkable consistency, proving as effective in Asian villages as in African cities, as relevant in Latin American slums as in European suburbs. Wycliffe Bible Translators reports that Romans consistently ranks among the first biblical books translated into newly written languages. Missionary linguists working with previously uncontacted people groups find that Paul's logical progression from universal guilt to divine grace resonates across every cultural context they encounter. The letter that transformed first-century Mediterranean communities continues producing similar transformations in 21st century societies separated by continents and centuries. The translation process itself reveals Romans' remarkable adaptability. Concepts like justification and redemption find equivalent expressions in languages that developed independently of Greek philosophical vocabulary. The Inuit language expresses forgiveness through a word that literally means unable to think about it anymore. African languages capture reconciliation through terms describing the restoration of tribal harmony. These diverse expressions demonstrate that Romans addresses universal human experiences that transcend linguistic and cultural boundaries. Modern psychology has discovered remarkable correlation between Paul's description of internal spiritual conflict in Romans 7 and contemporary understanding of addiction, compulsion, and behavioral change. The passage where Paul confesses, "I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I practice," resonates powerfully with anyone who has struggled against self-destructive patterns. Recovery programs increasingly adapt Paul's principles, recognizing that lasting transformation requires more than willpower. It demands supernatural intervention that addresses root causes rather than surface symptoms. The 12-step process pioneered by Alcoholics Anonymous reflects Romans' progression from acknowledging powerlessness through accepting divine assistance to making amends and helping others. Many rehabilitation centers report higher success rates when they incorporate Paul's insights about the need for new birth rather than mere behavior modification. Economic development programs in impoverished regions discover practical applications of Romans' teachings about work, generosity, and community responsibility. Microfinance initiatives based on biblical stewardship principles demonstrate lower default rates and higher community impact than secular alternatives, validating Paul's insights about character-based economic relationships. Organizations like Opportunity International and world vision adapt Romans' principles of mutual responsibility to create sustainable economic change. When borrowers understand their work as service to God, rather than merely personal advancement, loan repayment becomes a matter of spiritual integrity. When communities embrace Paul's teaching about caring for the poor, economic development transforms from individual achievement into community responsibility. The results prove measurable and sustainable. Villages that implement Romans-based economic principles show decreased poverty rates, increased educational opportunities, improved healthcare access, and stronger social cohesion. Women gain economic empowerment through businesses that reflect biblical principles of dignity and worth. Children receive education that combines practical skills with moral foundation. Communities develop resilience that enables them to weather economic challenges while maintaining social stability. Environmental stewardship movements find theological grounding in Romans 8's description of creation groaning for redemption. Paul's vision of cosmic restoration provides hope and motivation for environmental responsibility, while his teachings about contentment and simplicity challenge consumption patterns driving ecological degradation. Christian environmental organizations like the Creation Care Network draw upon Romans to argue that environmental destruction represents not merely poor policy but theological error. If humans are called to be stewards of God's creation, then pollution becomes sin. If Christ's redemption extends to all creation, then environmental healing becomes gospel work. If believers are to live simply so others can simply live, then excessive consumption violates Christian principles. These applications demonstrate Romans' continuing relevance to challenges Paul could never have anticipated. Climate change, resource depletion, species extinction, and environmental degradation all find the theological framework in principles Paul established for understanding humanity's relationship with creation. The letter, written to address first-century religious conflicts, provides guidance for 21st-century ecological crises. Perhaps most remarkably, Romans continues producing the same fundamental transformation in modern hearts that it generated in ancient ones. Technology changes, cultures evolve, and social structures shift, but human nature remains constant in its deepest needs. The need for acceptance, purpose, forgiveness, and hope. In hospital rooms where patients face mortality, Romans speaks of life that death cannot touch. In courtrooms where justice seems absent, it reveals divine justice that never fails. In broken homes where relationships crumble, it demonstrates love that endures all things. In prisons where despair reigns, it proclaims freedom that no wall can contain. Each application validates Paul's original insight. The gospel addresses human needs so fundamental that they transcend every boundary of time, culture, geography, and circumstance. The truth that transformed a first-century tent maker continues transforming 21st-century seekers because it speaks to realities as constant as human existence itself. As Romans continues reshaping the modern world through countless applications in countless contexts, its true nature becomes clear. More than ancient literature, more than theological treatise, more than historical document, this letter functions as a living force that adapts to new challenges while maintaining its essential character. Like water that takes the shape of its container while retaining its molecular structure, Romans molds itself to contemporary needs while preserving the revolutionary truths that have transformed lives for 20 centuries. The reshaping continues. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new contexts where Romans' ancient wisdom proves surprisingly contemporary. The letter that changed the Roman Empire continues changing the modern world. One heart, one community, one challenge at a time. Part 7. The Eternal Letter, Romans' Unfinished Journey. Stand for a moment at the edge of any great forest and observe the remarkable continuity that stretches before you. The towering oak, whose trunk you touch, began as an acorn that fell perhaps 2 centuries ago. Its roots draw nutrients from soil enriched by countless generations of fallen leaves. Its branches shelter creatures whose ancestors found refuge in this same woodland when your great-grandparents were children. Yet this ancient tree also supports new growth, fresh leaves that unfurl each spring, new bark that forms each season, young saplings that emerge from forest floor to reach toward sunlight. This is the miracle of continuity within change, of eternal principles expressing themselves through ever-evolving forms. And this same miracle characterizes the letter Paul wrote to Rome nearly 2,000 years ago. Born in a specific moment to address particular challenges, it has transcended its original context to become something far more extraordinary, a living document that continues growing, adapting, and producing new fruit while maintaining its essential nature. As humanity ventures into territories Paul could never have imagined: space exploration, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, global interconnectedness, Romans provides unchanging moral and spiritual principles for navigating unprecedented challenges. Like the North Star that has guided sailors across unknown oceans for millennia, Paul's letter offers fixed reference points in an age of rapid change. Consider the ethical frontiers that await human exploration. As we peer into the fundamental building blocks of life through genetic research, questions emerge that would have seemed like fantasy to previous generations. Should we alter the genetic code that determines human characteristics? Can we engineer enhanced intelligence, extended longevity, or improved physical capabilities? Where lies the boundary between healing genetic diseases and redesigning human nature itself? Romans provides crucial framework for addressing these bioethical dilemmas. Paul's emphasis on human dignity as image-bearers of God establishes that human value derives not from capabilities or characteristics, but from divine design. This principle suggests that genetic therapies aimed at healing diseases align with biblical mandates to care for the suffering, while genetic enhancements designed to create superior classes of humans violate the equality Romans proclaims. The letter's teaching about the body as God's temple adds another dimension to these considerations. If human bodies deserve reverence as dwelling places of divine presence, then genetic modifications require careful ethical evaluation. Treatments that restore proper function honor the body's sacred nature. Alterations that pursue vanity or superiority may violate its dignity. As artificial intelligence develops capabilities that increasingly mirror human consciousness, Romans' insights about the uniqueness of human nature become more relevant than ever. Paul's letter addresses fundamental questions about what makes humans distinct from other forms of life, questions that take on new urgency as machines develop apparent consciousness, emotion, and decision-making abilities. Romans' teaching that humans alone bear God's image provides theological foundation for debates about artificial intelligence, robotics, and the definition of personhood in an age of technological convergence. If consciousness, creativity, and moral reasoning are gifts that flow from divine image, then artificial systems that simulate these capabilities remain fundamentally different from the humans they imitate, regardless of their sophistication. This distinction proves crucial for questions about rights, responsibilities, and relationships with artificial intelligences. However advanced machines become, Romans suggest they lack the divine image that grants intrinsic worth and moral agency. They may serve human flourishing, but they cannot replace human dignity or supersede human responsibility for moral choices. Global communication networks have already begun fulfilling one of Paul's most ambitious visions, enabling Romans to reach isolated populations previously unreachable by traditional methods. Digital translations make the letter accessible in thousands of languages simultaneously, while audio and visual presentations overcome literacy barriers that have historically limited biblical access. For the first time in human history, Romans can truly reach every tribe, tongue, and nation. as Paul originally envisioned. Satellite internet brings the letter to remote villages in Amazon rainforests. Mobile technology delivers it to nomadic tribes in Saharan deserts. Translation software makes it comprehensible to speakers of previously unwritten languages. The letter that began its journey on foot with Phoebe now travels at the speed of light to reach every corner of the globe. This technological multiplication of Romans' reach demonstrates how divine purposes can be accomplished through human innovation. The same creative intelligence that enables scientific discovery also serves spiritual distribution. The communication networks designed for commerce and entertainment become vehicles for gospel transmission. Technology intended for secular purposes finds sacred application. Yet even as Romans reaches unprecedented global audiences, it maintains its transformative power in intimate, personal encounters. The businessman in Tokyo who discovers that professional success cannot satisfy spiritual hunger. The university student in Lagos who learns that human wisdom cannot bridge the gap between earth and heaven. The refugee in Berlin who finds that divine grace offers hope beyond human circumstances. These individual transformations follow patterns as consistent as the migration routes birds follow across vast continents, from spiritual emptiness to fulfillment, from guilt to forgiveness, from slavery to freedom, from death to life. The destinations remain constant, though the starting points span every possible human condition. Climate change and environmental degradation present challenges that demand both immediate action and long-term perspective. Romans 8's description of creation groaning for redemption provides theological grounding that neither panics about ecological crisis nor ignores environmental responsibility. Paul's vision of cosmic restoration offers hope that motivates stewardship while trusting ultimate renewal to divine intervention. The letter's teachings about contentment and simplicity challenge consumption patterns driving ecological degradation. When believers embrace Paul's principle that godliness with contentment is great gain, they naturally reduce demand for resources that strain planetary systems. When communities practice Romans' teachings about mutual care, they develop sustainable patterns of sharing that benefit both human welfare and environmental health. Environmental stewardship organizations increasingly draw upon Romans to motivate conservation efforts that combine practical action with theological foundation. If Christ's redemption extends to all creation, then caring for the environment becomes gospel work. If believers are called to live responsibly as stewards of divine gifts, then environmental protection expresses Christian discipleship. If creation itself awaits redemption, then current environmental crises represent opportunities to participate in divine restoration. As humanity confronts the possibility of extraterrestrial life, interplanetary colonization, and the expansion of human presence beyond Earth, Romans' cosmic scope provides theological framework for understanding humanity's place in an expanding universe. Paul's letter already anticipates questions we are only beginning to ask, offering eternal principles for challenges we are only beginning to face. If life exists elsewhere in the universe, Romans' teaching about creation bearing witness to divine reality suggests that God's presence extends beyond Earth. If humans establish permanent settlements on other planets, Romans' principles for community life provide guidance for developing just and peaceful societies in space. If we encounter intelligent life from other worlds, Romans' emphasis on the universal need for redemption raises profound questions about the scope of divine grace. These cosmic applications stretch human imagination while maintaining continuity with Romans' essential message. The same principles that guided first-century believers through the challenges of multicultural churches in the Roman Empire can guide 21st-century believers through the challenges of multiplanetary civilization in the space age. Perhaps most remarkably, Romans continues demonstrating its capacity for infinite application without losing its essential character. Like a master composer's symphony that reveals new depths with each performance while maintaining its fundamental melody, Paul's letter adapts to contexts he never imagined while preserving the truths he considered non-negotiable. The letter that began in a Corinthian house 2,000 years ago continues its journey through human history, generating new insights while accumulating wisdom from previous applications. Each generation's discoveries become resources for the next. Augustine's insights inform Luther's breakthrough. Luther's Reformation enables Wesley's revival. Wesley's movement inspires King's resistance. King's example motivates contemporary activists. The treasury of understanding grows richer with each application. Yet Romans remains far from exhausted. Like a deep well that provides fresh water to every generation while never running dry, Paul's letter continues offering solutions to problems not yet encountered, answers to questions not yet asked, hope for challenges not yet faced. Today, somewhere in the world, a reader encounters Romans for the first time and experiences the same transformation that changed Augustine, Luther, Wesley, and countless others across the centuries. Tomorrow, a scholar will discover fresh insights that illuminate contemporary challenges. Next week, a community will find in Romans' principles the wisdom needed to address local difficulties. Next year, researchers will validate through objective study what believers have known through experience, that this letter possesses remarkable power to transform lives and societies. The journey continues. As long as humans face questions about divine relationship, personal purpose, social justice, and eternal hope, Romans will remain relevant. As long as hearts hunger for acceptance, minds seek truth, and souls long for meaning, Paul's letter will provide guidance. As long as human nature includes both moral aspiration and moral failure, Romans' solution will address the deepest needs of human existence. The letter that began as correspondence to first-century Roman believers has become correspondence to the human condition itself. It speaks not merely to ancient questions, but to eternal ones. It addresses not just historical circumstances, but fundamental realities that transcend time and culture. Consider this remarkable truth. Every word you have heard in this exploration of Romans' story continues the letter's own journey. As these insights take root in your understanding, as these principles influence your choices, as these truths transform your perspective, you become part of Romans' unfinished story. The letter Paul wrote to people he had never met continues finding new readers it has never addressed. The message crafted for first-century challenges continues solving 21st-century problems. The truths recorded on ancient papyrus continue transforming modern hearts with the same power they have demonstrated for 20 centuries. Romans' journey is unfinished because its destination lies not in the past but in the future, not in historical completion, but in eternal continuation. As long as humans exist, Romans will remain relevant. As long as hearts need transformation, Romans will provide the path. As long as hope matters, Romans will supply the foundation. The eternal letter continues its eternal journey, carrying eternal truth to every generation, every culture, every heart willing to receive its revolutionary message. And in that continuation lies perhaps the greatest miracle of all, that words written by a first-century tent-maker in a Corinthian house continue echoing through time with undiminished power, reaching across the centuries to speak as clearly to your heart as they did to their original hearers. The journey continues. The letter lives on. The transformation never ends.